A few reflections on the seventh Sunday in Ordinary Time. The title that I given to these reflections is Participating in God's Mercy and Compassion. Often we are confused to take the right decisions. When we see various options in front of us, it's difficult to make the right choices. However, there is always a possibility to take the right moral and ethical decision, provided we make use of simple parameters or guidelines. For a Christian, the values of Christ become guiding principles in one's search for meaning and in making the right choices. It is more than the golden rule: treat others as you would like them to treat you. Jesus offers a radical invitation to live in a different way. The liturgical readings of this Sunday help us in this regard. Jesus' teachings are not merely a series of instructions, but also a way to act in various situations so that people change their perspectives. In other words, to see from the perspectives of Jesus. His preaching asks us to extend our love to all, to love even our enemies, to pray for those who have hurt us, and to give without any hope of receiving something in return. In place of judgment, hatred, and violence, loving, giving, and praying become the responses that we are invited to offer. I have 3 points. The first one is a conscious effort to weaken the powers of the enemy through love. The Gospel reading from St. Luke chapter 6 verses 27 to 38 centered around how to live in this complicated world amicably and as a beloved son or daughter of God. In spite of evil and wickedness which surrounds us, like those enemies, those who curse you, mistreat you, strike you, overpower you, the teachings of Jesus are opposite to what we usually react to live. The treatment that Jesus asks his disciples or followers to give to those who are against them is such that those who are opposing must feel inner conversion by seeing our good deeds. Strangely, but truly, we are invited to abandon a worldview that many would consider practical and reasonable, and instead one that society would consider radically impractical or foolish. For example, giving credit without looking for a return, allowing someone to hit again, stop judging, and so forth. The Jews disliked and hated the Romans because they oppressed them. Romans were colonizers and foreigners who enslaved the Jews. But Jesus tells the people to love these enemies. Probably they must have left Jesus after hearing those words. In fact, Jesus wasn't talking about having affection for enemies. He was talking about the act of the will. It's tough to act when we have to make a conscious effort to follow an act of love to which we are not only usually accustomed to do. Loving our enemies means acting in their best interest. We can pray for them and we can think of ways to help them. Jesus seems to be trying to tell us that if we do what our enemies do us, then it is going to be an endless cycle of violence. Someone has to stop in order to give space for peace. In other words, freedom is not trying to overpower, swindle the enemy who is before me, but to weaken the ferocity and violence that is harboring in that person. That is possible only through love. The second point is giving out in full measure, and the return will be the same. The words of Jesus are quite tough to follow. For Jesus, love means action. It is not just feeling good or keeping silent, when others do bad things to you? Jesus asks, in fact, to be active, to take peace initiatives in meeting the specific needs. Certainly, this is easy to do with those people who love us, people whom we trust. Here, love means doing this even to those who dislike us or plan to hurt us. Jesus was kind to those Romans who sought healing, like that centurion servant that we see in Luke chapter 7, or servant of the high priest whose ear was cut off by Peter, Luke chapter 22. Jesus gives a comforting ear to Nicodemus, the Pharisee, the member of the Jewish ruling council, John chapter 3. He also feels a Samaritan he also heals a Samaritan from his skin disease, Luke chapter 17. In fact, Samaritans were considered arch enemies of Jews. What's striking here is this: a forgiving spirit demonstrates that a person has received God's forgiveness. All the more, forgiveness must be total. Therefore, Jesus uses the picture of measuring grain in a basket to the full amount. If we are critical rather than compassionate, we will receive criticism. If we treat others generously, graciously, and compassionately, however, their qualities will come back to us in full measure. We are to love others and not judge them. By doing so, God would be accompanying us. Michelangelo Buonarroti said, "Do not fret, for God did not create us to abandon us." In our struggles, especially in our being as humans, God's merciful eyes are always upon us. For God's love is unconditional and impartial. The third point, the final one: going beyond the ordinariness to reach the extraordinary. Even though the Mosaic law allowed tit for tat, retaliation or revenge, the young David, as we see in the book of Samuel chapter 26, shows his heroism by not harming his opponent and deadly enemy, King Saul. The reason is David recognizes Saul as anointed by God, chosen by God. Thus, mercy wins over the place of the death of Saul. The new law that Jesus gives us of that of being merciful to others who harm us, hate us, mistreat us, and make our life miserable to us, thus being generous, gentle to those who might not be able to pay us back in good measure. Moreover, prayer is the best weapon to defeat the enemy of human nature, evil and wickedness. We see here Jesus' accent that we are all children of God, Luke chapter 6. Therefore, Jesus invites us to be merciful even as your Father is merciful. As sons and daughters of our God, we have a bigger role to play in our dealings and everyday affairs of life. The seventh Earl of Shaftesbury would say, "By everything true, everything holy, you are your brother's keeper." Saul failed in this role because his pride and jealousy overtook him. That was his crime. God follows us. Therefore, he created us in his own image to be partakers of his divine nature. On the other hand, God became like us, as St. Paul tells us, indicating how the first Adam was replaced by the last Adam, the life-giving Spirit. And this life-giving Spirit is walking with us, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Hence, St. Paul courageously says, when he felt defeated, "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed." 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 to 9. These beautiful words must encourage us when we are lost. A good way to encourage ourselves is to accept the situation and see with a merciful perspective. Carl Jung says, acceptance of oneself is the acid test of one's whole outlook on life. We cannot run away from ourselves. Let the words of the apostle to the Gentiles may ring aloud in our ears. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. A few questions for reflections. The first one: how can we respond to Jesus' call of loving, giving, and praying in place of judgment, hatred, and violence? The second: how is Jesus challenging me in today's egoistic, hedonistic, or charvaka, self-fulfilling and self-glorifying world? Third, what is Jesus saying to me personally as I continue to encounter very challenging but engaging and energizing words of Jesus? Finally, let's conclude these reflections with a short prayer. Loving God, you are kind and merciful. Lead us away from the temptations to judge and condemn, so that we too may be kind, merciful, and forgiving. Transform us so that we love as Christ loves. O Lord, you are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. You pardon all my iniquities, redeem my life from destruction, crowns me with kindness and compassion. I cry aloud to you, and you answer me from your holy will. I lie down and sleep, and I wake again, for you have sustained me. I will not fear the men of this world, even if thousands sent themselves against me. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for salvation belongs to you alone. May your blessing be ever on your people. God of wisdom, you gave us your Son to show us how to love. Help us to listen deeply to Him and learn how to choose His way of forgiveness and generosity. We make this prayer in Jesus' holy name. Amen.